So what I'm concocting now is a custom dye for the frames, because the dye that I used before, I used just the straight blue to make it easier and just put that on because I wanted to see, well, just how the black was going to show through when I put it in the grain. And as you can see, I've taken care of sanding off the black and leaving it just in the curl. So it looks kind of messy, but it looks good when you get the dye over top of it. So what I did is I took the blue dye that I originally used, and that's actually what you see on this offcut that I'm using to sort of color match here. And since the frame, the picture itself uses a lot more of a teal tone to it, right? It's a little bit more towards the greens. All I have to do is add green to this blue until I get it in the neighborhood of what I want. I don't want it to be so starkly blue that it takes people's eyes away from the picture. I want it to kind of be around the same tone. So what I've been doing is, as I go through, I've been adding a 1/4 teaspoon of green to this bucket of 1/8 of a cup of the blue, and just mixing it up and putting a little swipe on this block. Now you can see the colors as they've been changing. So this is the original swipe, just straight out of the bottle, just like this. And then here was after I added just 1 of the 1/4 teaspoons of green. I did just one to see about how much it moves with 1 scoop. And then this was adding an additional 2, and this was adding on an additional 2. Now it turns out that I could go with either one of these 2 last ones on the picture when I put it up by the various parts of the picture. So I think I'm actually going to go with the one that's all the way a little bit greener, so it's a little bit more muted, especially since that matches a few more regions of the picture. So that's how I'm going to do it, and then I'll put on a heavy coat. I might need to make more, which is why I was keeping a formula going, and we'll see what it looks like afterwards. So I just finished resawing the 2 boards that I've already applied color to, and you saw a little earlier I took the MFK 700 with a down spiral flush trimming bit, and I flushed the veneer to the side here so that I could run it through the bandsaw and get a cut. And you know, you can see that there's been a little bit of motion since I did the cut. It's honestly been a couple hours because I got distracted with something else that I shouldn't have let myself get distracted with. But I'll be putting some plastic resin glue on this to form the second glue line that I'm looking to do on this piece. Now you gotta sort of wonder, well, why bother doing another cut in the first place? I mean, it was flat before, right? I mean, when you saw it sitting on that bench, it was just fine when I did that cut. So why would I want to change this? Well, there's a couple reasons. One is, I just finished doing this and I glued it all up. So all the wood has been acclimated at the current humidity and all that. So of course it just stayed, you know, flat to flat, it stayed flat. So that was no problem. But now that I've done this cut, why am I getting so much of a bow? I mean, there's an incredible amount of bow on this top piece. Now, this top piece is also the one that has this glue line that's 1/8 of an inch off this top surface. So what happened is, when the veneer cured using the plastic resin glue, of course, as it cures, it also shrinks. So it's going to be pulling this surface in. Now, before, it had a glue line up here, and it had a lot of material down below. I mean, it had 15/16 of poplar below, so it had a lot of meat to try bending. Well, that board was able to fight that, and it stayed flat, like you could see in the MFK when I was using the MFK to do the trimming. So, but now that I cut it away, of course, now it becomes, there's less meat here to fight that glue line. So this glue is still pulling on it. That's one factor for this bow, is because of the glue line that shrank. The second factor is, like, as I record this, it's April 1st, so, you know, happy April Fool's Day. And we're very much nearing the very tail end of our super dry season here in Arizona. I know it's hard to believe that there's anything other than that, but we do. So during January to the end of August, or end of April, I generally expect that whenever something goes through the bandsaw, it's always going to open the kerf like this, which is actually kind of nice, and you don't have to worry about it pinching. Now, granted, there is a transitionary period, but the other months, it always pinches. Like in August, in July, August, through basically November, it will always pinch when you send it through because of all the humidity. Now, the reason for that is the moisture gradient that's in the wood. And I'm actually going to do a separate video to describe some of the moisture gradients and a couple different tests that I've done for you. So, in this case here, what happened is, because it's so dry right now, these outside surfaces are drier than the inside. There's more moisture in there, and the gradient, the moisture is on its way out. There's always going to be more in here because as soon as it gets to the surface, of course, it comes off pretty quickly. So during this time of year when it's much, much drier than the rest of the wood, you're going to have more moisture on the inside, and that surface is going to be expanding. So that's why this one here expanded and it curved. It's got a bit of a bow here too, even though it's still pretty stout wood. This one here, of course, that's only helping making this one bow even further. So that's two factors that are causing this bow. So the way that you're going to want to fight this is you're going to want to add an extra glue line to this. In a way, this is like adding that balance veneer. It's very much the same idea. You're trying to add glue lines in even numbers. So I have one glue line here. I cut it here so that I'd add another glue line here. So I just finished cutting this on the bandsaw, and I'm going to glue it right back together. And the reason for that is, if you remember the way that I'm going to make this frame, there's this side board here that's going to be on the edge, and it's going to be like a cock bead, so it's going to be proud. So it turns out that there's about 1/4 inch of material off the back of this board that I'll be resawing off tomorrow and then running through the drum sander just to smooth up the back of this. I'll end up keeping that poplar because I use that as a secondary veneer whenever it's hidden. So what will end up happening though is I will have a glue line, you know, 1/8 of an inch from this top surface, and then after I do that cut, there'll be another glue line. This one here will be 1/8 of an inch from the bottom surface. So we're going to have two glue lines that are going to be rigid, not wanting to really move, equidistant from the center. So humidity can pass in and out, the moisture can pass in and out of the board, and as it expands or contracts, it's going to do it equally because it's got the same amount of binding on either side. So this is very much the same idea as a plywood. This is exactly like making a 3-ply plywood in this case here. So whenever you look at like a plywood, they're always talk about, oh, plywood always has an odd number of plies. That's true, and it also has an even number of glue lines. And that's actually the key, is the glue line. It's not so much the plies. If you look at like the high-end cabinet plies, those are all 15-ply boards. It's not the wood that's keeping it flat, because there's very, very little wood. Those are very, very thin sheets that have been packed together. The reason is they've got a lot more glue in that board, and the rigid glue lines are all packed together, so there's a lot less ability for it to move. And it makes for a very, very stable surface. I mean, then when you get down to the ones where they're more like a lumber core, 5-ply boards, well, there's a lot more opportunity for the wood to want to expand, and there's a lot less opportunity for the glue to stop it from doing so. So, in a way, this is what you're trying to do. You're trying to make a 3-ply plywood out of this with a rigid plastic glue. Granted, plywoods don't generally, I don't believe they really use the rigid plastic glues, but that's what I'm going to be trying to do here in a moment. So once this is glued up, then tomorrow, when it's nice and firm, I'll take off that 1/4 inch off the back. Now, no discussion about balanced veneers and glue lines would be complete without going back to some of the original stock and seeing what happened to that. So what I did is, this is the quilted maple board that I used to get these veneers. Now, this board happens to have some reasonably nice quilting to it, so I didn't want to just scrap it and use it as lumber for making this frame. So that's why I ripped 2 pieces of veneer off of it. And what I did though is I ripped a piece of veneer off this surface and then this surface. So I took them off the 2 topmost surfaces. So in a way, if you remember, there's a moisture gradient that goes through this board. Now I'll be discussing this more in another video, but the surface of it, you know, as you go down towards the middle of the board, you'll either be increasing or decreasing in moisture, and then as you hit the center and then you go back out to the outside, you're just reversing that gradient. So by taking them off of both sides, those 2 boards, these 2 veneer slices had about the same moisture content in them. Now granted, there's a small gradient in there, but I'm not too worried about that. You can easily let them dry with a little bit of clamping and they'll come out flat. With this board though, I didn't do anything to keep it straight, and yet it's straight. In fact, when I threw it on that pile, I intended to keep it vertical so that it would have really good airflow on both sides of it, but I did actually lean it on a small board, and that might be why there's a small crook on it over here. But I did nothing special to keep this thing straight, because when I took that evenly off both sides, yes, I revealed the surface here that has, you know, this time of year, that has more moisture here. But I also revealed one on this side that has the same amount. So basically I'm balanced on both sides and this board stayed straight. So that's something to think about as well. If you're keeping some nice board that you want to use for veneer, if you're going to take a slice of it to make some veneer, take a slice off the other side as well, and you'll be fine. And then you can keep that other slice for your future work. So I do have a couple boards here that have all these rough sides from, because I harvest veneer from them fairly often. Now, one other thing I wanted to mention is, let's take a look at these 2 cuts. I used I won't mention the brand, but I used a sort of commodity, actually one that's fairly highly rated, resaw blade on this board, and you should be able to see. Let's see if I can get the light on that just right. It's going to be tough. Oh, there you go. So you can see that there's actually a lot of ridges on here. It's not bad. I ran it through very, very slowly so that I could get it as smooth as possible because I knew that that blade wasn't the smoothest cutting blade. I had a Resaw King previously and it had snapped, and I had sent, that was the blade I had as a backup blade while I sent off the other one to be resharpened and repaired. So what I did is tonight I reinstalled the Resaw King, and that's where these boards went. Now I pushed these through as fast as I could go, and these are just smooth. They are as if I just took a hand block and hit it with 80 grit. So it's an expensive blade. It does get resharpened. You can resharpen it up to like 40 times. I believe the number is like 40 or so. Basically, it's a band for a bandsaw, but then it's like they take table saw teeth and they braze it on there. You can actually see a video where they show you how it's made, and that's how it goes. And it goes through anything quickly, and it leaves just a gorgeous cut. So again, it's not cheap, but if you can swing it, I know you're going to love that for doing some resawing. So I wanted to mention that when I did this, initially I was talking about using the China ink. Charles Neal had made a great suggestion. He said he always uses China ink, so that's why I got some China ink. China ink and the ink, it's the same thing. All it is basically extremely finely pulverized carbon. So that's what I've used on some other projects since then for getting things black. Now I had a bottle that I had just remains of that I thought I'll go ahead and use. It was that little small one from Michael's, and that's what I used on these boards. Now they actually looked pretty good after the second coat, but they still weren't all the way black, and normally even with the China ink you need a third coat. So I had a birthday coupon, so I went to Woodcraft, and while I was there I spotted the General Finishes water-based ebony dye. Now the other dyes that I've been using for this, these were also General Finishes water-based dyes. So I thought, well, I'll give it a try, because worst case it's going to be pre-mixed violet. This stuff is black. It's great. It actually went on very, very well as my third coat on these, and it made them dead black. Now of course remember, they already had 2 coats of the China ink on here. But what I did is after I did all the coats, I was using just a foam brush. I went ahead and just took, it was almost dry, and I just rubbed it on this piece of maple that I was using for sampling the colors. And you could see that even with that, just a dry brush with the foam brush, it left a very, very black mark. If you did that with a full load of dye on it, you might even get away with only 1 coat. So I was very impressed with that. I think I'm going to be using that for future projects. So give that a try. So I jumped ahead a little bit on the project during the week. I got a chance to sneak in here and do a little bit of glue up as I could. Normally during the week I can't get in the shop at all. But this is the board that had the dye on it. So this is the quilted maple. It looks so boring when it's like this, but once it gets wet, it really shines. And then I glued on the 2 side runners for it. Now if you remember, this is going to be ripped in half. So now that I have these 2 side runners on it, I'm going to go ahead and rip it down the middle to get it so that both sides are going to be the same width. And then I'll glue on the other pieces of the black beading. Now the black beading, you saw how I did the dye, and that I did change to General Finishes for that last coat, which really worked out well. The one thing I've done since then though is I applied a light coat of shellac to the whole part that was dyed. Not so much here, because this is going to be for gluing onto the wood. I just wiped on a coat really quickly. Now the reason for that is, when this is on this board, when I shoot this with a water-based finish, which is going to be General Finishes polyacrylic, when I shoot that on this board, if this was just a water-based dye on this side, and then the water-based dye in the middle, of course, it's going to dissolve a little bit, and it's going to intermingle, and then I'd get a little bit of a fuzzy line here on the 2 colors. So that's why I wanted to somewhat seal that first.